Father Calabasas stopped at Duncan before going into St. Mary's Church of Lynn that morning. He was a Catholic priest, but had a sweet tooth, or, as he said to the barista that morning, pardon my sweet thing, but I might have an extra squirt of that caramel syrup in my coffee this morning. Sweet thing was a slip that the barista didn't care about because it was Lynn, Massachusetts. And 5 in the morning. English was not his first language. Nobody knew if Father Calabasas was a Nordic kind of pale, Swiss, or Swedish kind of pale, but he seemed to hail from some country where paleness is a quality of the majority populace. Nobody knew if his accent was German or Transylvanian, but it was something similar. Some accents sound all the same to Americans, but the Duncan coffee on his breath was proof of his becoming Heart of Lynn. He carried his cold brew down the aisle of St. Mary's. It was so gray inside the church that he felt he had woken up before God did. Tap, tap, tap went his shoes, working their echolocation to the altar, where he bowed and veered left to enter his office. He lit a candle at his desk. He liked candles more than using the electric lights. He sipped his coffee while reading from a book on theology and waiting for the sun to rise. His office was something akin to a captain's quarters to him. It was decked out with shelves of books on theology and world history, and decorated with religious relics, certificates, and photos of him and fellow priests. There was a picture of him and his grandmother back home who had lived to be 107. There was a picture of him and a drug addict, a 20-something-year-old girl who he had helped on a spiritual journey of sorts. He made phone calls to her every 2 weeks to check in, and she was doing well. There was a photo of him at a baptism of quintuplets. He looked delighted in all of his photographs, but his pale and gaunt Draculan features betrayed himself. Physically speaking, he was a paradox, because he simply looked too ghoulish to be a priest. He sat down at his desk because he wanted to get some reading done before the 7:30 Mass. A thud made him turn his eyes away from his text to the ceiling. "Hark the herald pigeons sing," he said to himself. He blessed what he thought were pigeons with a chuckle. He delighted everything that lived, and he liked finding different aspects about different creatures to delight in. He appreciated how some pigeons cooed, despite how humanity discarded them. He always decided to give them greeting glances when he happened upon them in the parking lot outside St. Mary's. He liked the pigeons cooing, and in turn, he liked the seagull's perseverance. When he found a spider descending down from the ceiling of his office one afternoon, he cupped it in his hands and carried it outside. "Don't let the pigeons make a meal of you, little friend," he told the spider when letting it down into the turf of grass along the sidewalk. And how did he treat the ultimate creature? The one that cooed like pigeons when it prayed. The one that found a reason to persevere. The one whose heart sometimes seemed to be dangling above the precipice of hell by one cobweb string. He treated his fellow man kindly, whether he saw them in church or not. A louder thud came. "Huh?" Father Calabasas said, looking up from his text again. "That's one big pigeon." He looked back down at his desk, with his eyes treating his Duncan cold brew the same bewildered way as they'd treat a mystery potion. There came another thud that made the priest raise his eyebrows. Then there came a great creaking from above that made the rest of the church shiver. Father Calabasas stood up. He looked up at the ceiling with quite the inquiry in his eyes. but the boards of the ceiling seemed sworn to a new secrecy. Or had they been so frightened that they lost their tongue? He maneuvered around his desk while keeping his eyes upon the ceiling the whole time. He wandered out of his office and into the main body of the church. It was still empty, but less gray, for precursory sunlight was touching the stained glass windows and just shyly lighting the church's interior. He shuffled down the aisle with his head back and his eyes up. The roof sounded like the groaning hull of a ship. It was so great that Father Calabasas quickened his pace to the exit of the church because he thought the roof would collapse in on him. He was letting out a "what?" when the sound of a giant bell cracked open the morning. It seemed that the bell's signal echoed within the shell of the atmosphere. Father Calabasas hurried out and down the marble steps at the front of the church while the bell signal droned lower and lower until its sounding ceased. He appeared utterly baffled. He shimmied into the empty parking lot while all the employees of the bank across the street filed out to find the source of the ringing. Again, a bell boomed out into the morning. But the thing was that St. Mary's bells were retired. They hadn't rung for decades. Not since the 70s, at least. As far as everybody knew, only seagulls frequented the bell tower at the top of St. Mary's, nesting and leaving white droppings, but never ringing the giant bells. It rang again before the second sounding could settle down. Father Calabasas could just make out the startled chatter of the bank employees across the street until their voices drowned inside the metallic roaring of the bell. He spun around in the parking lot and looked up. He gasped. There, on the gable and at the bell tower, was the silhouette of somebody tall, muscular, hairy, hominid. Its arms were lanky and long enough to reach into the bell tower. Because of the sun's triumphant rising, whatever stood on St. Mary's roof was only visible as a silhouette. Father Calabasas's gasp mimicked the bell and continued on until it echoed out of existence. The silhouette was black as ink in front of the creamy orange, yellow morning sky. Why, the thing was blocking out the sun itself. The bank employees started screaming across the street as the thing on St. Mary's roof rang the bell again with a janky but mechanical jerk of its arm. The screaming of the crowd across the street below must have agitated the black mass atop St. Mary's roof, for it started ringing the bell in greater succession. It jerked its arm back and forth more quickly. And now, the great bell rang in panic-inducing harmony with the smaller bells of the tower. Father Calabasas would have sworn he heard the thing hooting underneath the agitation of the bells. But before he could zero in his ear on the barely audible hooting, the sound of sirens scared the thing away. It left while the bells radiated their metal echo into Lynn. He kept his face in a gasping expression while watching the thing slide down the roof and disappear behind the church. He noticed how tawny the thing was with hair. Like bristles on a ruined paintbrush, it was covered in hair. This was the last quality he noticed about the thing. Father Calabasas took a step deeper into the parking lot. Oh, how that black mass had disturbed his pigeons. He needed to go and chase it until he remembered the crowd of people across the street. He turned around before he could continue deeper into the parking lot, and he saw how the people huddled together. Even the bank's security guard had an unsettled expression on his face, while the women clung to him. The bells had ceased to echo when Father Calabasas crossed the street. He put his hands out and levered down his arms in a calming motion, like a conductor quieting the band. "It is all right, everybody," Father Calabasas insisted. "The thing has ended. The thing has ended."
"What was that thing, Father?"
asked the security, in a thick Bostonian accent. How strange it was to hear a Bostonian accent conveying fear. "Well, it was quite big," Father Calabasas said, sounding sarcastic. "I think we can all come to an agreement on that."
"Oh, somebody has to catch it!"
the old bank receptionist squealed.
"Father, what the hell was it doing up there, ringing your bells?"
the security guard asked. His face was red and seemed about to pop with sweat. A police car pulled up and parked on the curb of the sidewalk outside of St. Mary's. The cop hopped out of the car and stood beside Father Calabasas, making the two of them immediate partners.
"It was a man!"
The old receptionist shrieked at the police officer, but before the police officer could inquire furthermore, the security guard blurted,
"That wasn't no man! Hell no! And I saw the thing, officer."
"Thing?" the police officer inquired.
"That bastard must have been 10 freaking feet tall!"
The security guard complained.
"I saw it, officer."
All the other employees cowered. They took turns looking up at the bell tower in front of the yellow morning sky before looking back into the huddled horde they formed. What a sour hollandaise sauce was that sky. The police officer turned his attention to the calmest amongst the bunch. Father Calabasas widened his eyes when he saw a call for responsibility in the police officer's eyes. The priest cocked and tilted his head, as if his skull was a bingo machine, rotating to the winning number. "I guess you saw it too, Father?" the police officer asked. "Just a shadowy version of the thing, Your Honor," Father Calabasas said matter-of-factly. "And it was quite hairy. Oh, and tall like he said." "These crackheads are evolving," the police officer said while shaking his head. "Oh no," Father Calabasas said, hunching toward the police officer and speaking in a low voice. "See, I've assisted in the rehabilitation of quite a few, crackleheads in my day, and you see, well, I don't think any of them got so hairy and tall because of their habitual bane." "Well, then, how do you explain this, Father?" the police officer said in a low voice of his own.
"Oh my goodness!"
the old bank receptionist shrieked.
"It was a giant monkey!"
"Was it, Father?" the police officer inquired. "It was monkey-like, Your Honor," Father Calabasas said after a moment's hesitation, but he didn't sound sure enough. "You guys might want to keep an eye on the police log tomorrow." The police officer chuckled. "I'm going to take down everybody's statement. I'm sure I'll be able to find you inside, Father." "Yes, I have a rendezvous with a bygone called Brew in there," Father Calabasas prophesied. The conversation that the priest and police officer had was inconclusive. They conversed in his office, and the inquiry only seemed to cement the situation into a more bizarre molding, for the police officer believed the priest the most of all amongst the other witnesses. Father Calabasas went into detail how he heard the thuds and heard the ceiling creaking before he hurried out to see the thing ringing St. Mary's bells. He left out the detail of the thing hooting because he still wasn't completely sure of it. "By the way, Father," the police officer said while shaking the priest's hand, "you call the judge Your Honor, although I don't think you'll ever be seeing one. What do I call you?" "Tommy, Sergeant, Officer, your fellow man," the police officer said with a twinkle in his eye. "I'll get out of your hair, as I understand you have mass soon." "I'd rather have you in my hair than a giant monkey thing," Father Calabasas joked. The two chuckled, and the police officer left, leaving the priest alone in his office again, with an empty Dunkin' cup on his desk. Coincidentally, the bells began ringing when he hung up the phone. How politely did the priest treat the nuisance? He didn't even bother to go outside to try to see the thing, for it was the same time as it was the other day when the same thing happened. He knew what it was, but he didn't know why it was so attracted to St. Mary's Church, to this church. The rest of the day carried on as normal, but an escalation occurred the following Monday morning when Father Calabasas was waiting for the barista to make his cold brew. There was a television in the corner of the room playing the news.
Authorities are still investigating this bizarre incident, but still nobody can explain what creature was on the security footage of the grocery store.
The woman news anchor said, while the footage cut to footage of a grocery aisle taken from above. It showed shoppers hurrying away, while a hominid with orange hair, twice the size of the fleeing shoppers, was ransacking the shelves of food. Because the footage was from above, only the head and shoulders of the creature was visible, and its visage was covered in its orange hair, but its fingers were somewhere between purple and black, and they were very long, thick fingers.
3 Stop & Shop employees have quit following this incident, and Stop & Shop has made an official comment about the situation saying, "We here at Stop & Shop appreciate our customers, of all different shapes and sizes, but do not condone this kind of behavior. We apologize for the disruption at our Lynn location on Washington Street the other day."
The news anchor reported,
This coming hours after another bizarre incident at St. Mary's Church, where the thing was reportedly sighted ringing the church's bells before fleeing.
"Get yourself on the nearest Mayflower and come up here,"
Father Calabasas said into the landline phone in his office that morning. Dr. Milton Kellogg arrived the following Wednesday afternoon, carrying his bags and suitcase into St. Mary's, which then smelled like the cardboard-tasting communion wafers and candles. Father Calabasas was in his mass attire, a white robe with a green stripe down the center, when the doctor hurried down the aisle.
"I came as soon as I could,"
Milton croaked. He had a nasally voice that so desperately wanted to be British.
"but I didn't come all this way for you to try and convert me again,"
he said when coming to a stop before the altar. Father Calabasas's face became lit with amusement. He seemed to be waiting for the opportune moment to laugh.
"Old friend Milton,"
he finally spoke.
"how is the alligator farm?"
"Business is blooming,"
Milton said, despite the disinterest in his voice.
"The Deinonychus skull is a real draw with the little children."
"Just as long as you keep them away from the real hungry living alligators,"
Father Calabasas teased.
"Oh, have you seen that movie, Lake Placid?"
"Yes, I did, Tobias, and in my opinion it is ridiculous."
"I hope we have time to go and see a less ridiculous movie when this whole thing is over,"
Father Calabasas mused. Milton squinted behind his glasses. His acquaintance's amusement always perplexed him.
"This whole thing,"
Milton inquired.
"Your request was urgent, Tobias. I wish you did some explaining over the phone."
"Perhaps I thought you wouldn't come."
"You must instill some better belief in me, Tobias."
Milton sighed. Even his sigh was disinterested.
"Well, why don't you start with what you saw?"
Father Calabasas went on to describe the events of the bell ringing. Milton opened up his laptop, and Father Calabasas directed him to the footage of the thing in the grocery store.
"I don't believe it,"
Milton said in a kind of elongated gasp.
"Well, you better believe it, my friend."
"No, I mean, I don't believe it,"
Milton said while stroking a non-existent beard.
"It seems to be a Gigantopithecus blackie.
And what is that?"
An ancient species of primate that went extinct in Asia 200,000 years ago, give or take,"
Milton said. He lifted a pointed finger and started tracing his equation in the air in front of the laptop screen.
The aspects are unmistakable, its size and orange hair. It's a distant relative of the orangutan, but it's supposed to be an ancient relative, not living, you see.
I've seen it ringing my church bells. What do you call it again?
Gigantopithecus.
Milton answered breathlessly.
It was supposed to have died around the time humans were leaving Africa.
The both of them went silent, remembering their previous conversations and friendly debates. The silence was agreeable because both subconsciously knew that today was probably not the appropriate day for a friendly debate. Besides, either one already knew that they couldn't sway the other's opinion. Finally, Father Calabasas broke the silence.
Some things come back from the dead, Milton.
Another silence came while they rewatched the footage from the grocery store.
Are there any zoos around?
Milton asked.
The Stone Zoo, but that is far away and they do not have any orangutans or anything of the sort. Could it be a new species?
No, it's the Gigantopithecus, all right.
Milton mused.
What makes you so sure?
Because you called me for help, Tobias.
The utterance of his first name made Father Calabasas flinch, but he remained composed.
But can you riddle me this, Dr. Kellogg?
Father Calabasas waved his finger while beginning to pace the area between the pews and the altar.
So what if it is Gigantopithecus? That's a mystery in and of itself. But why did the creature, not once but twice, ring the bells of my church? The bells of which not many in Lynn are old enough to remember ever hearing.
Well,
Milton began to think aloud.
I'd say monkey see, monkey do, but you say those bells haven't been rung in years.
Decades, Father Calabasas hissed.
Pongo pygmaceus, that's orangutan to you, has been recorded quite comically, driving golf carts, using saws, and doing very human things.
Milton explained, although there was an air of uncertainty in his voice.
Oh, Milton, if you saw how urgently this thing rang the bells,
Father Calabasas exclaimed.
What are you suggesting, Tobias?
That this thing, this here Gigantopithecus, was doing more than monkey see, monkey do.
Father Calabasas explained.
I theorized that this was an act of desperate spiritualism, a monkey in search of God.
Milton was so enamored by the priest's monologue that he was fearful of the church organ coming to life in melancholic song, but it didn't. So he listened and hoped that no church music would begin playing. Father Calabasas went on.
You are from the party that believes humanity springs from apes, right?
Yes,
Milton answered, a little amused.
But Gigantopithecus is not an ancestor of humankind.
He is manlike.
Father Calabasas shrugged. He made shrugging appear so much like a move in a musical.
When in your book did ancient man develop religion? Or did we search for it? Is this Gigantopithecus ringing the forgotten bells to, shall we say, see if God responds to him? Shall we say, to summon God? Does it want to learn?
Tobias, I think you're fantasizing.
Why of all things, Milton, would the Gigantopithecus come to my church and ring the bells?
Father Calabasas emphasized. And although Milton was a staunch atheist, it made him go silent.
I'm going to ask you a question that I fear to ask, but I must ask it.
Father Calabasas said.
Is the Gigantopithecus a danger?
A 10-foot-tall primate?
Milton sighed.
Generally, orangutans are not aggressive towards humans, but those are orangutans. Little is actually known about Gigantopithecus. Put one in a modern-day civilization with cars, traffic, pedestrians, out for walks, children playing on playgrounds, children playing outside during recess. We might not desire experimenting with just waiting to see how Gigantopithecus behaves with modern man.
Father Calabasas thought of the screaming bank employees. He thought of how shoppers in the grocery fled.
I mean, Gigantopithecus has the teeth of a generalist herbivore. But again, primates have been known to become territorial.
Milton explained. Is my church in danger?
If this thing returns and causes a panic during Mass, there's no telling how it would react to human panic.
Milton answered. The two became silent again. It would have been a good time for the church organ to come to life and provide some kind of daunting melody, for they didn't want to fill the silence with more theories, or worse, fill it with violent predictions. What do we do, Milton?
We find it, learn about it.
What do I do if it comes back at the wrong time? Father Calabasas said, rephrasing his questions and making it sound more dire. How do I protect my flock?
Do you mean firepower, Tobias?
Milton asked, but the priest didn't answer.
You know guns aren't allowed in church.
Milton teased, but didn't smile. How long do you plan on staying in Massachusetts, Doctor? Father Calabasas asked, after deliberating with himself in his own mind.
Now,
Milton began.
I plan on staying a whole lot longer than I initially planned.
Father Calabasas passed the background check, and on Saturday night he wasn't getting ready for Mass in the morning, but he was sawing off the barrel of his newly purchased double-barrel shotgun. There was a bandolier of shells hung up on the wall, while statuettes of Mary held her arms out open, as if shrugging in surprise. While sawing off the barrel of his new shotgun, he thought of that comment Milton made about an orangutan using the saw. The sound of the saw teeth biting into the barrel filled his office while he worked at candlelight. The barrel toppled onto the floor and let out a hollow clang that was similar to the bells. Father Calabasas held up the sawed-off double barrel and examined it, examining how the orange candlelight reflected in its black barrel. I dub thee, little flock, he told the shotgun. He then turned around to the lever-action rifle and considered sawing off the buttstock and barrel as well, but was unsure. It was a Marlin Model 336, and he had already decided to name it David, after the David and Goliath story. Had anybody ever pitied the giant? This he wondered while babysitting his new purchase in his office. He remembered how urgently the black silhouette rang the bells. It gave him a sense of dread, but also a sense of pity. It was a sense of sympathy. Was it a sense of sympathy? This thing, it reminded him of the abominable snowman from the 1964 film Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. He used to watch it every Christmas season when he was a boy in his snowy village, and the abominable snowman always frightened him greatly. Father Calabasas trekked into Lynn Woods the following Sunday afternoon. Milton wore a Davy Crockett hat that had a raccoon tail attached to it. He also wore a beige safari uniform, with the pants tucked into brown combat boots. Father Calabasas wore his black Cossack. He looked as ghoulish as always, but he looked alert.
Ah!
Milton yelped when Father Calabasas drew Little Flock from within the Cossack. Luckily, he did this while they were deep enough within Lynn Woods.
Do you have any idea how illegal that is?
Milton asked, but Father Calabasas didn't seem to care. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want, Father Calabasas quoted, but this did not assuage Milton at all. Did you not bring a gun, my friend?
A gun?
Milton squealed. Yes. Don't you use one of those revolvers when tiptoeing around your alligators?
Yes, but that's in South Carolina. And I have a revolver, not a sawed-off shotgun. We aren't Bonnie and Clyde, Tobias.
I believe he used a sawed-off rifle.
But his sweetheart used a saw-off 20 gauge. That's not the point.
Milton squeaked. We have a Gigantopithecus to catch, Milton. This is just for protection, Father Calabasas said. Milton looked to his side to see the priest cradling the shotgun in his arms, the same way someone might carry a little lapdog against their chest. There's an old legend about a pirate who buried his treasure in these woods, Doctor, Father Calabasas mused, amongst the crunching of their footsteps. They say he died in an earthquake, thus the term Dungeon Rock, now a sort of tourist attraction in the woods.
Dungeon Rock?
It's a stony crevice in the earth, underneath a wedge of boulders. Father Calabasas went on. I know about this only because a youngster I befriended used to crawl on the crevice and shoot up. It is a dark and damp den down there, it is.
Have you been down there?
I did. I went with the youngster one night to go and collect her discarded needles. With her, and she finally decided on turning over a new leaf. I tell you this in confidence, of course. But I am proud of her, and this forest brings up memories. She studies at the North Shire Community College now. Oh, but I haven't seen her in a while. Milton simply listened to the priest while they walked. In fact, the more they walked, the more they remembered their friendship, and the less they remembered about the Gigantopithecus. They laughed about the first debate they had in Cambridge. Their friendship was built on disagreement, but also a kind of respect, for each knew the other possessed a propensity for learning. It was what they talked about, while Milton put vinegar on his fish and chips, while Father Calabasas dipped his fries in tartar sauce. Oh, I love tartar sauce, Father Calabasas moaned, as the two scaled the hill in the woods that led to Dungeon Rock. Milton threw up his hands, and the two stopped. The gesture made Father Calabasas regret his wild profession of love for tartar sauce. But the forest didn't move. No crows flew away, but they remained in the branches where the sun beat through in lime-colored flakes.
Do you see this, Tobias?
Milton whispered, while reaching for a tuft of long, orange hair. He grabbed the tuft as gently as he could, and pulled it out of the tree bark like wool. The hair of the Gigantopithecus, Father Calabasas gasped. Milton put the tuft of hair up to his nose and sniffed.
The sample is fresh,
he said snapishly.
Look around for prints or more tufts of hair.
Father Calabasas started doing so, but the earth was too dry for prints, and they were on the hill near Dungeon Rock, so there was too much gravel within the dirt. He unfolded his arms and drew his shotgun, while the two crept into the opening in the forest where Dungeon Rock was. There it is, Father Calabasas said. The entrance of Dungeon Rock.
I don't think the species could squeeze inside there.
But we can, Father Calabasas said, gripping Milton's arm when the Gigantopithecus emerged out of the trees. How yellow were its eyes, its face a purplely bruised visage. It opened its mouth and roared, displaying yellow canine teeth and flinging spit out into the air. Father Calabasas pulled Milton into the entrance of Dungeon Rock, just as the Gigantopithecus swiped at the two of them. They nearly tumbled down the wooden stairs, and would have been digested by the dark stomach of Dungeon Rock. But Father Calabasas caught himself. He held onto both Milton and his shotgun, Little Flock. The two caught their breaths while listening to the agitated breathing of the Gigantopithecus. Its breathing amplified into a hoot and then into a shriek. Very little sunlight leaked into the stairway in Dungeon Rock while the two listened. They mastered their footing there on the stairs, intaking the primeval odor of the Gigantopithecus, while it continued complaining in discoordinated hoots and shrieks above the entrance of Dungeon Rock. They could smell its breath, and it smelled like swampy pond water. Its body odor was doggy, almost as pungent as a cow, and they reminisced about its arms. Oh, its biceps. Had it indeed grabbed a hold of Milton, there was no telling what he would have done to the paleontologist. They must have hunkered down in the stairway for 20 minutes, while waiting for the beast to amble away. Oh, and the heartbreak Father Calabasas felt while replaying the scene in his head. Although this species had perhaps tried to do something significant by ringing the bells, it simply could not be allowed to. Those weren't its bells to ring. Such thoughts ran through Father Calabasas' mind, while he held onto his friend and his little shotgun. "Tomorrow night, Milton," he whispered, "we must bring the Gigantopithecus to an end."
"Tobias, you misunderstand. We caught it off guard."
"It's too dangerous," the priest hissed in a whisper, his voice being carried down the stairway of Dungeon Rock. "How angry it was when we entered its domain today. How angry it will be when our Lord doesn't answer to its baying at the bells. What a rampage will it be sent into when it is denied God? Then it will truly become the ape it was always meant to be." The ending notes of the priest's mini-speech echoed down the stairway, being carried down into the dark stomach of Dungeon Rock. "Then it will truly become the ape it was always meant to be. To be. Milton took a deep breath through his nose. He was too frightened, even still. "It will ransack the streets of Lynn," the priest hissed. "It will overturn vehicles. It will turn its victims' skulls into bells." Milton was too abhorred to speak. The plan was simple. Milton was stationed in the bell tower, while Father Calabasas waited at the altar with his shotgun and lever-action rifle. All the candles in the church along the pillars were lit, with the altar being the most lit area of the church. He was curious. The plan also acted as an experiment, for there was a plate of communion wafers and a goblet of red wine on the altar. Would the Gigantopithecus accept the Eucharist? Did the Gigantopithecus, perhaps, on some level, possess a misty understanding of ceremony? Father Calabasas wanted to know. Father Calabasas flinched at the first tolling of the bell. He blinked and reminded himself of the mission. He looked down the long aisle between the pews, looking out at the church's open doors, and imagined it would be just big enough for the Gigantopithecus to crawl through. He swallowed his dread and kept his eyes on the doorway ahead as another tolling sounded. He imagined how scared his friend was, but he reminded himself again that this mad idea had a purpose. For some time, Father Calabasas listened to the bells from above. They weren't ringing the way the Gigantopithecus had rung them. They clanged much more meekly, and not as urgently. The bells ceased. Silence fell upon Lynn. Father Calabasas retained his composure when the thing came in from the street. It crawled up the marble steps outside and bowed its head, while crawling to fit through the doorway, but it got on its two hind feet when it entered the aisle. It was no longer just a split-second episode in Lynn Woods. It was no longer a silhouette. The Gigantopithecus stood there, yards away from the priest. Father Calabasas inhaled as calmly as he could through his nose, and tried his best not to show emotion, while sharing eye contact with the Gigantopithecus. Its yellow eyes seemed wetted by the candlelight. Its woolly coat of orange hair covered its body aside from a plate of purple muscle on its front side. Its mouth and nose had a protruding nature. It looked alarmingly more man-like than like an orangutan. Oh, but it was so unnaturally tall. It looked alarmed to see the priest. Or was that its natural visage? Father Calabasas tried to keep his hands from shaking, while he picked up and offered the plate of communion wafers, in the air, which was now in a battle of the scent of the Gigantopithecus and the warm scent of the candles. "The body of Christ," he murmured in a voice he hoped only God could hear. The Gigantopithecus just stared blankly at him. There was some kind of recognition in its yellow eyes. "Is this what you want?" Father Calabasas asked the Gigantopithecus, but it didn't answer. This didn't mean yes, but it didn't mean no either. "If it is," Father Calabasas went on, "I'll bring it to you in the woods every Sunday evening." The Gigantopithecus didn't understand this either. It blinked and sniffed the air while looking at the priest dead on. It cleared its throat in a low grumble and curled back its lips in perhaps some kind of attempt at communication. It sniffed the air furthermore, and somehow Father Calabasas knew it was trying to smell the communion wafers. Was there a sense of familiarity being tied up in the air between them? The Gigantopithecus stepped forward, beginning its descent down the aisle. Father Calabasas kept the plate of communion wafers in front of him and waited. "The body of Christ," he repeated in a voice that was clearer than earlier. He gulped. The Gigantopithecus was extending out its long arm. It actually was reaching for the plate, and it made Father Calabasas' heart throb so much that he could have smiled. The Gigantopithecus swatted the plate out of Father Calabasas' hands. The air was a glitter of communion wafers for a second, while the plate clanged on the floor. It roared while diving at the altar. Father Calabasas ducked just in time and grabbed his shotgun. He crawled away from the altar while the Gigantopithecus turned around. The shotgun blasted out a tolling of its own. The Gigantopithecus roared in anger, for the buckshot had created little violet polka dots along the side of its purple chest. It closed its eyes and continued roaring. Father Calabasas fired the second round. He could hear the flesh being ripped off its shoulders when the buckshot splashed across the air. His whole body trembled while unlocking the shotgun and letting the barrel down. The thing was charging at him. He dove into a pew before he could reload Little Flock. The shotgun shells which he held went rolling away, rolling down another pew, and then another. The Gigantopithecus's fist shot down and cracked one pew bench in two. Boards and splinters erupted into the air. Father Calabasas climbed over a pew, catching a glimmer of brass on the floor. He picked it up, shoved it into his shotgun, and flipped the barrel back up. The Gigantopithecus regained its footing just in time, and brought both its fists up with the vigor of an executioner's beheading axe. Father Calabasas pulled his finger down on the trigger all the way. The Gigantopithecus threw its head back immediately when its forehead caught the brunt of the buckshot. It had been so close to Father Calabasas that its head had caught every ball in the volley of the round. Its deflating roaring came in conjunction with the wet crack its skull made. Father Calabasas watched the Gigantopithecus make one final expression as it fell down backward. Its mouth was open, as if it wanted to let out one final hoot, a final prayer. The church echoed with the thud its falling body made. Father Calabasas panted while watching steam exit gracefully out of the wedge at the top of its head. The wound reminded him of the entrance to Dungeon Rock. Milton hurried into the church while Father Calabasas watched the violet liquid pooling out of the Gigantopithecus' skull.
"Thank goodness you're all right,"
Milton sounded like he was breathing for the first time. "'Tis quite the time to thank God," Father Calabasas said while turning around to face his friend.
Did it reach for the communion wafers?
"There was a moment where I thought it was," Father Calabasas answered matter-of-factly. He held the shotgun rather limply now that it was empty. Suddenly, he remembered he was holding it, and was startled by it. "Oh," he laughed. "I better go hide this before the police arrive."
"Yeah, you better,"
Milton murmured. He was a bit astonished at his friend's resilience. Or was it a lack of surprise? It made him start to wonder if his friend had actually performed the rite of exorcism before. Part of him didn't want to know. Gunshots aren't the most abnormal thing in some parts of Lynn, but they are very abnormal from inside St. Mary's. So the residents surrounding the church did notify the authorities. "Gunshots," Father Calabasas said to the police officer while Milton was finishing dragging the Gigantopithecus's body down into the church basement. The priest was stalling the police officer on the front steps outside the church. "You know, now that you've mentioned it, a loud noise did wake me up from my nap. But there might be mice in the church rafters. Don't tell anybody. By the way, do you know any good exterminators, Your Honor?" They had used ropes to pull and drag the behemoth primate along the floor, until they let it tumble down the basement stairs. Milton wanted to bring it back with him to South Carolina for further study, without the pesky government involving itself. But there was something that unnerved him about the Gigantopithecus, even though it was dead. It picked at his mind and turned his consciousness into a scab, while he stood over the woolly, orange body of the thing, while Father Calabasas distracted the police outside. An ape that, as Father Calabasas presented, performed an act of desperate spiritualism. Was Milton's heart breaking, or was his mindset evolving against itself while he loomed over the body of the Gigantopithecus? He certainly had never scaled any religious building to ring its bells. He couldn't remember any time in his life where he was enthralled in an act of desperate spiritualism. But this ancient ape was. Well, Milton and Father Calabasas readied the body for the remaining hours of darkness that comes after midnight. He got a rental car when the sun came up, and the two struggled transporting the cadaver into the vehicle. They shook hands and Milton drove away. Besides a couple of incidents on the highway where Milton felt the car was going to lift up forwards in the air to balance out the 1,000 pounds of ape in the back, the commute went smoothly. He spent a couple of days transporting the body into his homemade lab near his alligator farm. He spent even longer dissecting and preserving the body and all its disassembled parts. But it was when he got to the head that a familiar fear returned to him that led him to call his old friend in Lynn, Massachusetts, in an act of desperate spiritualism.